Very happy to be joined by Charles Coulombe. Charles runs a great show with us over on the history of the Holy Roman Empire, but we wanted to have you on, Charles, to talk a little bit about the Iranian situation that's been going on, particularly the history behind it. So for those who don't know, there was a Iranian revolution in the 20th century that began the Islamic Republic that we see now, as it is called, and it replaced as many people know, the Shah of Iran. And Charles, I'm hoping you can give us some background about who the Shah was, and maybe some extended background about the history of monarchism in Iran. How did we get to this point where now we're talking about a potential monarch being put back on the throne there in Iran?
Well, to begin with, of course, Iran, I mean, their monarchical history goes back several thousand years. The original Persian Empire, of course, fought the Greeks at Thermopylae. That's what it's most famous for. Then they were overthrown by people called the Parthians, who in turn were overthrown by another native dynasty, the Sassanids, who were the great enemies of the late Roman Empire. They in turn were defeated by the Muslims. And Iran and its surrounding area became very much part of the Islamic milieu, although they're not Arabs by any stretch. They have a very different custom, a very different culture. The original religion was Zoroastrianism, which was a monotheistic faith. It still survives in Iran, but there are actually more Zoroastrians in India, where they fled after the Muslim takeover in the 600s. The people called Parsis are Zoroastrians. And if you've ever been in a motel in the States run by a man named Patel, in all likelihood you've encountered a Parsi. So now you know. At any rate, they had various dynasties take over Persia. The Mongols, of course, took it over as part of Genghis Khan's thing. His grandson Hulagu Khan was overthrown by a native dynasty, the Safavids. They in turn were overthrown eventually in the, I think, 1700s by the Qajars or Qajars, which brings us down to World War One.
Hey everyone, for full access to this episode, the Pelican Brief Weekly Show, and more coverage from Michael Haynes, go become a Pelican subscriber. You can use the code MURRAY for a little bit of a discount. You get access to the prayer app and more.
The last Qajar Shah had seen his country pretty much divided in terms of influence between the Russians and the British before World War One. Now, World War One comes along, the Russian Empire is overthrown, so Russian influence in Iran collapses. The British are busy fighting the Turks, taking Mesopotamia, what's now Iraq. And so there's a window of opportunity for Persia, as it was called then, to reassert its independence from any great power. There was an army officer by the name of Reza Pahlavi, who was the commander of what were called the Persian Cossacks. These were cavalrymen who had been trained by Russian advisors, hence the uniforms and the name, but they weren't actually Cossacks, they were Persians. Anyway, Reza Pahlavi, Reza the First as he became, overthrew the last Qajar in the 1920, and made himself the Shah. His Imperial Majesty the Shah and Shah. So the Pahlavis are a very new dynasty. That having been said, he was very much of a westernizer, as they all have been. And in common with the other monarchs who were more or less invented by the Western powers in the Near East, the kings of Iraq, Transjordan, Egypt, Libya, the Persian Gulf states to a degree, Afghanistan, even Morocco, Tunisia, they ran their countries with a sort of coalition of non-Muslims and Muslim minority groups, while maintaining a connection with the majority. This is why it was much, much easier under these sort of westernized Middle Eastern monarchies, the way it is in the Persian Gulf today, for Christians and for other minority peoples to get along than it had been before. So, World War II comes along. Reza is very, very keen on not getting involved. The problem with that, of course, is that the major means for the Allies to supply Russia, the Soviet Union, I should say, in the war against Germany, was through the Persian Gulf. Reza had played off the Axis against the Allies to maintain his independence. That didn't sit well with the Allies, so the result was a coup and the exile of Reza I. He's replaced with his son, Reza Pahlavi, who was the Shah in my boyhood. He becomes the Shah. He's a young man, a very young man. In the 50s, there's a sort of a leftist prime minister who is more Soviet-oriented. The Soviets, like the Russians before them and after them, always been interested in the Persian Gulf. So, long and the short of it was both the British and the CIA, especially when the Soviets had occupied Azerbaijan province of Iran, were keen on getting rid of this left-wing prime minister, so this coup, but the Shah stays. And then eventually the Shah comes of age, and he really, during his years, Iran saw an enormous amount of peaceful development. They were very good years to be a non-Muslim in Iran, but they were good years to be a Muslim in Iran. The oil, not unlike in Saudi Arabia and in the Persian Gulf, the oil money went pretty far. Iran became a very Western, solidly pro-Western, anti-Soviet ally of the United States. They had a certain ongoing rivalry with Saudi Arabia for the leadership of the pro-Western Arab world. Of course, for obvious reasons, the Shah was not, by any stretch, as fanatical about Islam as the king of Saudi Arabia. For that matter, I mean, there were many rumors either that he was a Zoroastrian or that he was a secret convert to Catholicism. I don't know if any of that's true. What I do know is that he ran his country in a very, very, very Western, very up-to-date manner. And he was a very strong ally of the United States. Now, there's an old saying, however, it's dangerous to be an enemy of the United States, but it's lethal to be our ally. And that's what the Shah discovered. Now mind you, he had a secret police called Savak. He was not really keen on opposition, especially communist opposition, or Islamist opposition. Now, the CIA, for many years, had kept one of the leading opposition figures to the Shah, the Ayatollah Khomeini. They had kept him in some state in Paris with lots of do-re-mi and so on. He was a happy kid getting his money. But under Jimmy Carter, who was about as brilliant a man as you can imagine a moron to be, Jimmy Carter, well, in the immortal words of Richard Nixon, he greased the skids for the Shah.
Yeah.
He cut off the money to the Khomeini, and he did everything he could to encourage his return to Iran and the Iranian Revolution. And that greasing the skids is the best way I can put it. Well, if that's what he wanted to do, he certainly succeeded. There was the terrible revolution in 1979. I remember this very well because my brother's best friend, when we were growing up, was a very nice fellow. His father was Iranian, his mother was Polish. She'd been a refugee in Iran during the war. They loved the Shah, as many Iranians when met in L.A. did. When I was at NMI, New Mexico Military Institute, my first year, that was when the revolution broke out. And I had a classmate, Naveed Amidzadeh, whose parents were killed in the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And his brother was at the same school as us. His brother went mad, died, and went into an asylum and died. And Naveed died that year of an aneurysm, which I have absolutely no doubt was brought on by the death of his parents. So I'm afraid that the Iranian Revolution is something that will always stick in my head.
Yeah.
And the Shah was forced to leave, of course. He went from country to country, and then he died. His son carried on as exiled royals do. You know, in the 50s, the area of Portugal near Lisbon called the Estoril had a lot of exiled European royalty. The King of Romania, the King of Italy, there were several others living there, the former region of Hungary. Well, in the 90s, the zeros, you had the Shah of Iran, the Emperor of Ethiopia, and the King of Rwanda, all living in Northern Virginia. So I used to call that the American Estoril. But at any rate, so that's one side of the situation. Now, the second side is that since 1918, the United States, in our foreign policy, have always contributed to the ruin of monarchies wherever we found them. In 1918, Woodrow Wilson specifically paved the way for World War II and Hitler and Stalin, as Churchill said, by insisting on getting rid of the Habsburgs and the Hohenzollerns and the Wittelsbachs and so forth. In 1945, and 43, 44, and 45, we backed communist guerrillas against royalist guerrillas in Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Romania, and so on. 1946, we contributed to the rigged plebiscite that got rid of the King of Italy. In 1952, the coup against King Farouk in Egypt was partly planned in the American embassy in Cairo. And, of course, that brought in Nasser and the Soviets in Egypt and, you know, the gift that keeps on giving.
Of course, right.
The 69, we were happy when King Idris was overthrown in Libya. Gaddafi's in. That really, man, oh man, were we smart. We were overjoyed when the King of Iraq was overthrown in 1958. That did us a lot of good. You know, and the wall of shame just goes on and on and on. In 1992, President Bush Sr. vetoed the restorations of the kings of Romania and Bulgaria. A few years later, President Clinton, during our fighting with Serbia, has pointed out at the time that the monarchists were the biggest opposition to the Milosevic government. And Madame Albright declared, "We don't do kings, but we do bombings. That we do. That's fine." And then in 2000 and when was it now? 2002, 2003, whatever it was. President Bush officially lost the Afghanistan war.
Yeah.
By vetoing the restoration of King Mohammed Zahir Shah. So, you know, I mean, if something's always winning, why jump off a winning horse? You know, I mean, why change policy now? It's always smacked us right back in the face. Why should we change? I mean, I don't get it. But apparently, the current regime in Washington is doing something very strange. They seem to be encouraging the restoration of the Shah.
Hey there, thanks for watching. If you want to see the full video, you're going to have to go to pelicanplus.com and sign up for our groundbreaking, truly Catholic platform. You can find your favorite podcasts. You can find your favorite prayers. You can find your favorite authors and even your favorite books. Visit pelicanplus.com and find out more.